On February 12, 2025, Barry Moore arrived at the Hennessy's home and was let in through a black steel door by Jade Hennessy, a female relative of the brothers, believing he was meeting people he had known his whole life. But what he encountered changed his life forever. Moore was branded and severely burned. This attack was one in a series of violent incidents that has taken place in Dublin since the assault on Jason Hennessy Sr., the Hennessy Gang's leader, on Christmas Eve 2023. Moore had been associated with the Hennessy Gang, a notorious crime group operating in West Dublin throughout his entire life. Moore was suspected of committing the ultimate betrayal, ratting them out to the authorities. As a result, his relationship with the gang took a deadly turn. Earlier that week, police had seized firearms and drugs from a field in Corduff, and the gang believed Moore had leaked the information to authorities. In their world, there was only one punishment for such action, and that's elimination. The Hennessy brothers, sons of the late Hennessy Sr., were determined to uphold their family's violent reputation. Since their father's murder, they had become hungrier for power, getting it through violence, drug dealing, and intimidation. Joining them in their operation were Kenneth Fitzsimons and his son, Dean Fitzsimons. They were close associates of the gang and deeply embedded in its operation, ensuring that anyone who crossed the Hennessys paid the ultimate price. On the day of the incident, when Moore arrived at the house, everything seemed normal at first, but then suddenly, Jason Jr. grabbed Moore's phone right out of his hand. Before Moore could react, Jason punched him in the face and demanded he tell the truth. But they didn't tell him which truth exactly they wanted. They had already made up their minds that Moore was a rat, and he was going to pay the price. At some point, Kenneth Fitzsimons brought out a 5-foot steel bar. He swung it at Moore's legs, hitting him over and over again with full force. Then Brandon, the youngest of the three brothers, took the bar from him and kept beating Moore all over his body. But the worst was when Jason Jr. pulled out a branding iron with the word rat engraved boldly on it and said, "He'll talk after this." He pulled out a camping stove, lit it, and started heating the iron. After some time, they decided that the iron was hot enough, and Jason Jr. took it and pressed it against Moore's stomach not once, but 6 times. Moments before this, Kenneth's son, Dean, joined in the attack, riding an electric motorbike straight at Moore, running over his legs. As Moore groaned in pain, Dean laughed and said, "I've been waiting for you," attesting to the fact that the attack wasn't spontaneous. Dean then picked up the steel bar and started hitting Moore. He also grabbed an axe, flipped it around, and started hitting him with the blunt end of the weapon. The attack lasted for around 20 minutes, and the helpless Moore had no way to fight back. As Moore writhed in pain, Jason demanded to know who set them up. But no matter how much Moore insisted he didn't know, Jason didn't believe him. To make his point, he branded Moore's face with the hot iron. Then the violence almost took an even darker turn when Brandon suggested they pull down Moore's tracksuit bottoms and violate him with a stick. Luckily, that never happened. They went on to threaten to burn his house down and torture him while his children watched. But in the end, they did none of that. Instead, just as suddenly as the attack had begun, they decided to let him go. But before Moore could leave, they wiped his phone and deleted all his messages. Barely able to stand from the severe injuries, he stumbled out of the house. Somehow, he managed to drive to a relative's home before collapsing. Sensing that something horrific had happened, the relative quickly called the emergency service. Moore was rushed to the hospital and doctors quickly assessed his injuries. While he was stabilized, it was immediately clear that he had suffered extensive trauma. Burns covered 3 to 4% of his body, and he had deep bruising, possible fractures, and severe swelling. On February 13th, Moore gave a full statement to the Gardaí, detailing every horrifying moment of the attack. With his testimony in hand, law enforcement swiftly obtained search and arrest warrants for multiple properties linked to the gang. 2 days later, more than 100 officers launched simultaneous raids across Corduff and Blanchardstown, with the Hennessy's family home being one of their primary targets. They forced their way inside the residence, securing it within minutes. In the backyard, they found a small garden believed to be the place Moore was interrogated and tortured. By the end of the operation, all 5 men were taken into custody. All the men were charged with assault causing serious harm and false imprisonment, both of which carry potential life sentences. They also faced charges for producing weapons during a dispute, referring to the branding iron, steel bars, and axe used in the attack. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, the accused remained defiant in court. Dean Fitzsimons became aggressive, shouting at officers and telling them before eventually apologizing to the judge. Shortly after, Jason also disrupted the proceedings, angrily denying ownership of several vehicles linked to him. Judge Paula Murphy eventually denied bail, ruling that the men posed a serious risk to witnesses and public safety. All 5 were remanded in custody and sent to Clover Hill Prison. With their leaders behind bars, the Hennessy Gang's grip on Corduff was shattered. For years, they had ruled through violence and intimidation, but their tactics had finally backfired. Due to their own paranoia, they turned on one of their own and eventually fell into a trap. The patriarch of the gang, late Hennessy Sr., had built a reputation as a dangerous and deadly figure, deeply entrenched in organized crime, drug trafficking, and feud. But despite growing up surrounded by crime, Hennessy Sr. initially led a relatively normal life. As a young man, he was a promising boxer, and for most of his adulthood, he avoided serious criminal activities. He worked various jobs, including as a truck driver, and managed to stay out of trouble even while living in Sheep Hill Avenue, Corduff, an area deeply entrenched in gang culture. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the neighborhood was controlled by the Westies gang, which dominated the heroin trade in Dublin. When the gang collapsed following the murders of its leaders, Shane Coates and Stephen Sugg, in Spain in 2004, a power vacuum emerged. Various factions rose to fill the void, and while Hennessy's friends and family members became involved in these successor gangs, he remained largely uninvolved. However, that changed in 2016 when he had his first major run-in with the law. He was charged, along with a family member, for engaging in threatening and abusive behavior and for resisting or willfully obstructing garde during a dispute near his home in Corduff. More serious charges were to follow. In 2022, he found himself in court facing serious charges of money laundering. He was accused of possessing €3,050 in criminal proceeds at a Bank of Ireland branch in Blanchardstown and of being in possession of a stolen Suzuki motorbike. His case was set to go before a jury in 2025, and he was even granted legal aid after the court heard he was earning just €350 a week. The charges represented only a tiny fraction of the suspected offense carried out by Hennessy and his associates. Gardaí suspected that Hennessy and his crew were running a massive drug operation, using intimidation tactics to keep their grip on the streets of West Dublin. These criminal enterprises brought gang members into conflict with several rival groups. One of the feuds led to dozens of violent incidents, including arson attacks, shootings, and assaults throughout 2018 and 2019. In one incident, shots were fired at a man outside Riversdale Community College in Corduff as he waited for a relative to finish school. More recently, Hennessy's fellow criminals clashed with associates of Tristan Sherry from Finglas, who was seen by Gardaí as a low-level organized crime figure. After attacking one of Hennessy's associates in 2023, Sherry found himself on the receiving end of a violent retaliation. This culminated in the events of December 24th, when Sherry and one other man stormed into Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown, armed with a machine pistol. They opened fire, hitting Hennessy in the neck. But this wasn't going to be a clean hit and run. Members of Hennessy's group tackled Sherry, and what followed was absolute chaos. Sherry was beaten and stabbed to death right there in the restaurant. As for Hennessy, he was rushed to the hospital by a family member, where doctors were able to stabilize his condition, but he was pronounced dead a week later. 6 men were later charged for Sherry's murder. Similar to their father, the Hennessy's brothers are also deeply involved in the criminal world, and without their father's influence, their actions became even more reckless and violent. Devin Hennessy, the eldest, had long been involved in the Corduff feud, a brutal gang war filled with shootings, stabbings, and firebomb attacks. Authorities repeatedly warned him that he was a marked man, even issuing a Garda information message in 2024. But Devin wasn't one to lay low. Just months after his father's murder, in August 2024, he survived an assassination attempt while driving a bulletproof BMW. This wasn't his first brush with death either. Back in 2019, another car he was in was shot at 5 times. He walked away unharmed, but when questioned by Garda, he refused to cooperate. In March 2020, Devin was convicted of violent disorder after attacking a man outside a courthouse. The situation got so out of hand that it took 20 officers to restrain him, but his criminal record didn't end there. In September 2024, despite the numerous threats on his life, Devin was caught with a stash of cocaine near Clover Hill Prison and convicted of drug dealing. Even with a target on his back, he refused to back down from the drug trade. Jason Hennessy Jr., the middle brother, was easily the most aggressive of the three. His reputation for violent outbursts wasn't just gang-related. Some of his attacks seemed completely unprovoked. Back in 2018, he received a 2-year suspended sentence for a brutal hammer attack in Dublin city center. Jason had gone to his car, grabbed a hammer and an iron bar, and attacked 2 men. One victim suffered a 4-centimeter head wound, while the other ended up with tendon damage to his fingers. In 2022, Jason was convicted of assaulting 2 female officers after they stopped a family member on suspicion of driving without insurance. Instead of complying, he spat in one officer's face. And when he was taken into custody, he had the audacity to laugh at the judge, saying he expected the court to be biased, but didn't care because he got 4 weeks off. Despite being the youngest of the 3 brothers, Brandon Hennessy was already deeply involved in the criminal world by the time he turned 17. In January 2021, authorities caught him bearing cocaine worth over 32,000 euros near Blanchardstown. He was part of a surveillance operation, and when officers moved in, he tried to flee but was eventually caught and arrested. 3 years later, in early 2025, Brandon was given a 3-year suspended sentence for drug trafficking. After their father's death, the Hennessy brothers launched a violent campaign of terror in Corduff. Anyone they perceived as a threat was targeted, and firebomb attacks became frequent, often with innocent families caught in the crossfire. But Barrymore's attack was where authorities drew the line. They believed the gang was losing control, making reckless and irrational decisions, and with mounting evidence against them, this could very well be the final act that sealed the Hennessy Gang downfall. And that will be all for today's video. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications for more criminal gang stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.